Hello. So this video lecture covers the question of human free will versus determinism. This is one of the most perplexing, challenging, and difficult issues in philosophy. The question we're dealing with here is the question of whether or not there are causes for human behavior. So if we think about other events that take place in the universe, if we're talking about things in the natural world, the motion of the planet Jupiter around the sun, what a river does, or how an oak tree grows, we don't think that any of these kinds of events in the rest of the universe, as far as we know, have free will. All of these things are a product of causes. And the question here is whether or not we should also say that human behaviors are just as much caused as are events in the natural world. So there are two basic positions on this issue. One is called determinism, and the other one's called the free will position. The free will position is sometimes referred to as libertarianism. I'll use those terms interchangeably. The claim of determinism is that all human behaviors are caused. So from a determinist point of view, whether we're talking about the simplest of everyday behaviors, like what you have for breakfast or what clothes you wear, to the biggest decisions in your life, questions about what career to go into, where to live, your personality type, your moral values, and everything in between are caused and determined by factors beyond our control. So from a determinist point of view, if I have an object and hold it in my hand and let it go, and it drops to the floor, I don't think anybody would think that that object has free will. We would say, given its mass, given the gravitational pull of the Earth, the laws of physics, and so on, that the object is caused to fall. It doesn't have any choice. It couldn't have done anything else. Well, determinism claims that that same thing is true not just for an object falling to the earth, and for all other natural behaviors as well, but they think that that applies to humans just as much. So determinists think that ultimately everything we do in our lives is ultimately caused by factors beyond our control. One way of thinking about determinism is that determinists claim that given the causes that have led to a person's behavior, the person could not have done anything other than what they actually did. So from the determinist perspective, if I have a bowl of Wheaties this morning for breakfast, the determinist claim is though I might think I could have eaten something else, a different cereal or eggs or whatever, the determinist would say if we knew enough about all of the causes that led up to what I ended up getting for breakfast, they would say that I couldn't have done anything else, any more than the object, when I let it go, could have done anything except fall to the floor. So immediately, one of the questions that we would have to ask a determinist is, what is it that they think ultimately are the root causes for our behaviors, like what I had for breakfast, or the clothes I put on, or my personality type, or who I'm attracted to, or any of these other things. Well, as you can imagine, it's very complicated. But I would say in the 21st century, if we are really generalizing, determinists tend to think that our behaviors are a product of one of two things. Either our genetics, on the one hand, or things like our environment and experiences on the other. So some determinists, for example, think that basically our DNA determines us to be the kinds of people that we are. So just like we think that our genetics determines things like your height and your skin color and your eye color, and that we don't really have any choice about those things. A determinist who favors genetics might say that your DNA doesn't just determine those aspects of yourself, your physical features, but it also determines things like your personality type. So some of you, if you've taken psychology classes, might be familiar with the distinction between what are called A and B personalities. A personality is very outgoing. They're extroverts. They can't sit down for more than a few minutes at a time, right? They're up and around doing stuff, very energetic. B personalities are more introverts. They're more kind of laid back, and they just kind of take things as they come. They don't get too high. They don't get too low. Determinists would argue that that kind of basic personality difference, whether you're an A personality or a B personality, might come down literally to your DNA, to your genes. So just as you get one set of genetics and you have blue eyes, another set of genetics you have brown eyes, from a determinist perspective, perhaps it comes down to your genetics as to whether you're an introvert or an extrovert, whether you're an A personality or a B personality. Other determinists think that it's things like our environment, so things like your upbringing, your family structure, your things like your teachers in kindergarten and first grade, your friends, siblings, right? All the various experiences that you have. So some determinists think that things like our environment determine our personality and the things that we do in our lives. So if you think about the difference between somebody who is born and raised in Montana versus somebody who's born and raised in Manhattan, New York, it seems rather obvious that they're going to be two very different kinds of people. They're going to have probably different kinds of values, different hobbies, different things that they enjoy. Right, and they're going to end up making different decisions and having different behaviors as they go through their lives. I think it's probably safe to say that most determinists think that our behaviors are a product of those two things put together. That is to say, our genetics plus our environment. I think very few determinists today would say it's just one or the other. So again, if you've taken psychology classes, if you're familiar with what's called the nature versus nurture debate, this is sort of the parallel in philosophy. Is personality determined by genetics? Is it determined by environment? And I think most determinists in philosophy would say that it's a combination of both of those things together. So we may be born with certain personality characteristics through our genetics, artistic ability, mathematical ability, again, A versus B personality, those kinds of things. But then our experiences help shape us as well. So in talking about this issue in class a couple of years ago, I had a student who volunteered that they were actually talking about this issue in her biology class. And I said, well, what does your biology professor say about it? And she said that the way that the biology professor described it is our genetics load the gun and our environment pulls the trigger. And that's, I think, exactly how a determinist would think of it. So determinism is the position that all human behaviors are caused. And typically today in the 21st century, determinists will focus on things like genetics and environment, and probably some combination of the two. Okay? So in theory, from a determinist perspective, I suppose, if we knew enough about all of a person's experiences, if we knew everything about a person's genetics, then just as, we could predict, events in the natural physical world, the motion of Jupiter around the sun, or whatever it is that we're talking about, a determinist would say if we knew enough about a person, we could predict the things they're going to do, what they're going to have for breakfast, what clothes they're going to wear, where they're going to live, what job they're going to have, all that kind of stuff. Against all of that are the libertarians. So the libertarians are the people who believe in human free will. And the minimum requirement for being a libertarian is that you deny the determinist claim that all human behaviors are caused. So libertarians think that human beings have some kind of genuine free choice. That's usually interpreted as meaning that a person could have done something other than what they actually did. So if I have Wheaties for breakfast this morning, to a libertarian, I could have made a different choice. So when I walked into the kitchen and I started thinking about what I wanted to have, I wasn't caused to have Wheaties. I could have made a different choice. The determinist thinks that that is illusory. The determinists think that ultimately, again, if we knew enough about all of the factors that went in to my making the decision, it was just as predictable as being able to predict that an object would fall to the floor when I let it go. Now, again, no doubt the causes are going to be a lot more complicated when it comes to human behavior, but a determinist would say don't let that fool you. Just because it's more complicated to predict human behavior than what an object will do when you let it go, that doesn't mean that those causes aren't just as real. So this is an introductory lecture on the free will issue, and on this topic there will be more video lectures coming.